My life just hummed along. Not perfectly happy, perhaps, but it was mine, and it felt stable. I'd settled into this comfortable routine with my husband, a sense of security wrapped around me, a trust in the long-term rhythm of our life together. It was just another Tuesday, an utterly mundane afternoon, the kind you never remember until something completely shatters it. I was probably just sipping my tea, maybe even humming along to a song on the radio, completely oblivious to the earthquake that was about to hit. It's funny, isn't it, how one moment can change everything. One minute you're feeling safe, grounded in your own home, and the next, the very ground beneath your feet just vanishes. I had no idea that the calm before this storm was so incredibly, profoundly calm. My world felt predictable, a cozy blanket, and I had absolutely no inkling that it was about to be ripped right off me, leaving me exposed and freezing. Then, my phone buzzed. Just a little vibration, nothing ominous, certainly nothing to prepare me for the icy words that would appear on the screen. I picked it up, probably with a smile, expecting a grocery list or a joke. But then I saw it, stark and cold. Get your things and leave. I have a new girlfriend. It hit me like a physical blow, a punch right to the chest that stole my breath. I felt the air leave my lungs, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. Shock, disbelief, a profound, searing betrayal. My mind just couldn't process it. I read the words again, and then again, willing them to change, to be a prank, anything but the brutal truth they presented. But they stayed there, unblinking, mocking. It was so impersonal, so dismissive. My husband, the man I'd built a life with, had just discarded me with a text message. The humiliation was immediate, a hot flush spreading across my face. I tried to call him, of course. My fingers fumbled, desperate for answers, for any explanation that wasn't this cruel. But he didn't answer. Or maybe he did, and his voice was so cold, so dismissive, that it was worse than silence. The reality of it slammed into me then. I was being thrown out, summarily dismissed from my own home, from my own life. I grabbed a bag, my hands shaking so badly I could barely pack essentials. It was a blur of motion, fueled by pure adrenaline and a rising tide of tears. That first night away, it was a desolate, empty space. I felt utterly lost, adrift, humiliated. Every shadow seemed to mock me. Every silence echoed the emptiness in my chest. The familiar comfort of my bed was replaced by an alien mattress, and the scent of my home, my life, was gone. I just lay there, staring into the dark, feeling the crushing weight of everything I had just lost. But even then, deep down, a tiny spark of something else, something determined, began to flicker. Finding a temporary refuge was like grasping at a lifeline in a turbulent sea. I landed softly, thank goodness, perhaps on a friend's couch, or maybe in a tiny rented room that felt utterly impersonal, yet offered a much-needed haven. Those first few days were a blur of raw grief, a constant ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe, hard to think. I cried until I felt hollowed out, the confusion a heavy fog that kept me from seeing anything clearly. The sheer shock of it all, the brutal suddenness, was a physical weight I carried everywhere. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift. The tears didn't come as easily. The confusion started to lift, replaced by a simmering, quiet anger. It wasn't a loud, explosive rage, not yet, but a cold, steady heat beneath my skin. I started replaying that text, those dismissive words, the absolute disrespect of it all. Who does that? Who tosses aside years of shared life with a mere flick of their thumb? It wasn't just the words, it was the entire package. The immediate demand to leave, as if I was nothing more than an inconvenient piece of furniture. And the public admission, the casual way he announced a new girlfriend, as if my feelings, my very existence, simply didn't matter. That's when the true nature of his cruelty, his utter lack of empathy, really solidified in my mind. The shock was finally wearing off, leaving behind a hard, crystalline resolve that began to form, like ice, in the very core of my being. I stopped crying. Instead, I started thinking. My mind, which had been so clouded by pain, suddenly felt sharp, focused. It was as if every tear I'd shed had washed away the illusion, leaving me with a clear, almost surgical view of the situation. I realized that my pain, this immense sorrow, could be channeled into something else entirely. It could be transformed into a strategic fuel, a quiet, potent desire for something more than just survival. I began to meticulously gather information, almost without realizing I was doing it at first. Little details about his finances, his predictable routines, those subtle vulnerabilities he always thought no one noticed. I even started to look into this new girlfriend, trying to piece together the narrative from his side, understanding the landscape of betrayal. This wasn't about being a heartbroken victim anymore. It was about understanding the battlefield. It felt less like grief and more like preparation. I took the first practical steps, securing important documents, cutting off legal access to joint accounts. Each small action felt like a quiet victory, a subtle regaining of control. These weren't grand gestures, just quiet, calculated moves, like a chess player setting up the opening pieces. I was laying the groundwork, brick by brick, for something much bigger, something that would shift the balance in my favor. And in doing so, I was preparing myself for the intricate dance that was about to unfold. My revenge, if you can even call it that, began to unfold with a chilling precision I didn't even know I possessed. It wasn't about screaming or grand gestures. It was about something far more subtle, a deceptive calm that masked the turmoil still churning inside me. I was careful, meticulously so, to make every action appear accidental, an unfortunate coincidence, or simply the natural consequences of his own carelessness. The last thing I wanted was for him to suspect me. I learned that the most effective sabotage isn't loud, it's a whisper. It was like an art form, really, an intricate dance where every step had to be perfectly timed, perfectly placed. I focused on what I knew he valued most, what truly mattered to him: his finances, his carefully curated professional reputation, his social standing, and yes, even that brand new relationship. These weren't random acts. They were targeted, specific, designed to gently, almost imperceptibly, chip away at his world. I wanted him to feel the slow burn, not a sudden explosion. One of the first things I did was subtly expose his unprofessional behavior to a few key clients. Nothing overt, just a quiet, almost casual mention of a past oversight, a gentle question that planted a seed of doubt. The kind of thing that would lead to lost contracts, but make it look like his own fault, his own slipping standards. I also became quite adept at orchestrating leaks of embarrassing personal details to his social circle. Again, nothing I could be traced to, just enough to fuel whispers and speculation. Then there were the financial records. Oh, the fun I had there, meticulously manipulating things within legal bounds to create tax headaches that would confound even his accountant. It wasn't about stealing. It was about creating a labyrinth of confusion and penalties that would gradually eat away at his sense of control. Each move was like pulling a thread from a tapestry, watching it slowly unravel, knowing he wouldn't even notice until it was too late. And his new girlfriend? Well, let's just say a few well-placed, entirely truthful but unflattering insights about his character found their way to her. Nothing overtly malicious from me, just honest observations that might sow tiny seeds of doubt in her mind. I wanted her to see the real him, the one I had unfortunately come to know so well, but through her own perception, not through my direct influence. After all, if he could discard me so easily, what would stop him from doing the same to her? Throughout all of this, I maintained the perfect outward appearance. A sad, but bravely moving on ex-wife. I offered sympathetic nods to mutual friends, perhaps a quiet sigh about the difficulties of divorce. He had no idea, not a clue, that I was the quiet architect behind his growing misfortunes. He was just starting to feel the subtle tremors, but he had no idea they were part of a perfectly orchestrated earthquake. At first, he was oblivious, of course. That's always the way, isn't it, when you're so wrapped up in your own world, your own perceived infallibility? He probably just saw isolated incidents, a lost client here, a minor financial hiccup there, but slowly, inevitably, the cumulative effects of my, shall we call them adjustments, began to pile up. His life, which had been so perfectly ordered, so meticulously controlled, started to unravel in ways he couldn't explain. I could almost picture him scratching his head, trying to make sense of the new cracks appearing in his carefully constructed facade. Business deals that seemed like sure things suddenly fell through, leaving him bewildered and scrambling. His impeccable professional reputation, something he guarded so fiercely, began to suffer from whispers and strange rumors he couldn't quite trace. Even his new relationship, the one he'd so readily discarded me for, seemed to be experiencing unexplained strains. His personal finances became a tangled mess, a labyrinth of minor but persistent complications. It must have been infuriating for him, used as he was to effortless success. I imagined his growing frustration, the slow burn of confusion turning into a simmering paranoia. He'd be looking for enemies, blaming bad luck, pointing fingers at external forces. The thought that I could be behind it all, his meek, discarded ex-wife, would have been utterly beyond his comprehension. His composure, which he always prided himself on, started to crack around the edges. I could sense his growing agitation, even from a distance, like a faint tremor before an earthquake. The man who thought he had everything under control was slowly, steadily losing his grip. He even tried to confront me. Oh, he did. Either directly, with that bluster he always used when he was cornered, or through mutual friends, demanding to know if I had anything to do with his sudden string of misfortunes. But I was ready. I maintained my perfectly innocent facade, eyes wide with feigned sympathy, subtly hinting that perhaps his own past actions were finally catching up to him. I'd just offer a gentle sigh or a wistful comment about how karma works in mysterious ways. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, knowing exactly when the impact would hit. Each deflection from me, each innocent denial, only served to deepen his suspicion while simultaneously making him doubt his own sanity. He was trapped in a web of his own making, only now the threads were being pulled by someone else entirely. The pressure mounted, his face growing tighter, his temper shorter. He was looking for a villain, never suspecting the quiet woman he'd so carelessly tossed aside. And then I knew the moment it clicked. That chilling certainty that must have washed over him like a cold wave. I was behind it. He finally connected the dots, but by then, he was already deep in the trap I had so patiently, so meticulously set for him. The walls were closing in, and there was no escape. He was beginning to understand that the consequence of his actions wasn't just my pain, but the complete unraveling of his entire world. The real show was just about to begin. The downfall, when it finally arrived, was significant. I saw it unfold from a distance, like watching a slow-motion film of a building collapsing. It wasn't a sudden crash, but a series of escalating tremors that led to a professional scandal, severe financial repercussions, and the complete implosion of his new relationship and social standing. He lost so much, not in one dramatic moment, but in a gradual erosion of everything he valued. And as I watched, a complex mix of emotions washed over me. There was satisfaction, yes, a deep, quiet sense of vindication that settled in my bones. But it wasn't the wild triumph I might have imagined. It was mixed with a profound sense of closure, like finally turning the last page of a difficult, painful book. And beneath it all, a weariness, an emotional fatigue from the journey I'd been on. Revenge isn't easy work, and carrying that burden, even in secret, takes its toll. It wasn't just about his demise. It was about my reemergence. Having achieved what I set out to do, having seen the fruits of my painful labor, I felt a distinct shift within myself. The need for retribution, the anger that had fueled me, began to dissipate. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted, allowing me to finally breathe freely again. I realized that clinging to that anger would only keep me tethered to him, to the past, and I was ready to truly let go. I started focusing on rebuilding my life, not in reaction to his, but for myself. I was stronger, undeniably wiser, and fiercely independent. The woman who had packed a small bag in a daze of humiliation was gone. In her place was someone who understood her own resilience, who had faced betrayal and found a deep well of inner strength. That painful journey had stripped away so much, but it had also revealed what truly mattered. I began pursuing passions I'd neglected for years, rediscovering parts of myself that had been dormant. It wasn't about finding a new relationship or seeking external validation. It was about rediscovering my own worth, from the inside out. I learned that true empowerment isn't about getting even. It's about moving forward, unburdened by the past, forging healthier connections with myself and the world around me. My ending isn't a fairy tale with a prince. It's something far more profound, a story of self-reclamation. It's about finding purpose, nurturing joy, and standing tall on my own 2 feet, completely removed from the shadow of betrayal. The text that shattered my world ultimately became the catalyst for building a new, more authentic one, and that, I've come to realize, is the greatest triumph of all.
My name is Clara Bennett, and I'm 28 years old. If you had asked me 3 years ago what happiness looked like, I would have pointed right here to the life Ethan and I built together. We weren't glamorous, we weren't exciting, but we were ours. Ethan and I met in college. He was studying finance, always with a neat stack of highlighters in his bag, while I was majoring in English literature, scribbling notes in messy margins. We started dating after sophomore year, fell hard, and by 25, I was walking down the aisle with him. Ethan, in his navy suit, smiling like I was the only woman in the world. That memory is etched in me like stone. After the wedding, our life settled into rhythm. He worked at an accounting firm. I taught at a small private school. We saved every spare dollar, dreaming of a home with a backyard, maybe a golden retriever, maybe kids by the time I hit 30. Friday nights were ours. A booth at Olive Garden, laughter over breadsticks, or a Netflix binge sprawled across the couch. He'd fall asleep with his arm draped over me, his wedding band warm against my skin. Boring? Maybe. But it was the kind of boring that felt safe, that felt like home. I used to tease him about it. We're the oldest young couple alive, I'd laugh, and Ethan would shrug, grinning. Better old and happy than young and stupid, he'd reply. I believed him. But everything started to shift the day Ryan re-entered his life. Ryan was Ethan's college buddy, the life of the party type who got married too fast, cheated too often, and wound up divorced by 27. When his marriage collapsed, Ethan reached out, offering sympathy. At first, I thought it was sweet. Ryan needed a friend. But Ryan didn't come alone. He dragged along his entourage, Derek, a serial dater who treated women like seasonal wardrobe pieces, and Josh, who bragged about never being tied down. They were always at bars, clubs, poker nights, chasing the chaos Ethan and I had left behind years ago. I told myself it was harmless. He needs guy time, I reassured myself. I encouraged him to go out, thinking it would make him appreciate our life even more. For a while it seemed fine. Ethan came home with stories about Ryan's disastrous dates, about Derek's ridiculous Tinder escapades. We'd laugh together, shaking our heads. But slowly, something in his tone shifted. One night, as I curled against him on the couch, Ethan said casually, "You know, Ryan thinks we settled down too early, that we missed out." I froze. Missed out on what? On life, on experiences, on figuring out who we are before we locked into each other. I laughed it off, kissed his shoulder. We know exactly who we are, and we're happy. But the words stuck to me like thorns. Over the next weeks, Ethan started dressing differently. Slim fit shirts, new cologne. He lingered in front of the mirror longer than I did. He stayed out later. Sometimes midnight, sometimes 1 a.m. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound of his keys in the door. When he finally stumbled in, he'd reek of whiskey and cheap perfume that wasn't mine. I told myself it was just Ryan's influence, that Ethan was too smart to fall for it, but doubt seeped in. Then came the night he looked at me across the dinner table, eyes darker than usual, and asked, "Clara, don't you ever wonder what it would be like with other people?" The fork slipped from my hand. "Excuse me?" He leaned back, almost defensive. "I mean, how do we know we didn't just settle? We got together so young. What if there's more out there?" Cold washed through me. "Ethan, I don't wonder. Because I chose you. I don't need anyone else." He sighed, shaking his head. "You don't get it. Ryan says marriage is just paper. We only get one life. Why not live it fully?" "Fully?" My voice cracked. "So you think what we have isn't living?" His silence answered for him. That night, I lay awake in our bed, staring at the man I loved. His face looked the same, his breathing steady, but something was slipping, a thread unraveling between us. I used to believe love was unshakable once you promised it at the altar, but now I saw it could be chipped away, one careless word at a time. Still, I clung to hope. I told myself Ethan was just lost, pulled by the noise of his friends, that he'd remember who we were, that our boring, beautiful life would be enough. But in my gut, I felt the storm coming. And storms don't wait for you to prepare. The first time Ethan came home after midnight, he brushed it off. "Poker ran long," he mumbled, tugging his shirt over his head. I wanted to believe him, but I could smell the lie, cologne that wasn't his, the faint trace of someone else's perfume clinging to his sleeves. I told myself not to spiral. Trust, Clara, trust your husband. But the silences grew louder, the late nights multiplied, and every time Ethan spoke, it felt less like him, and more like an echo of Ryan. One Saturday morning, as I was brewing coffee, he leaned against the counter and said, "Ryan hooked up with this girl last night. He says he hasn't felt that alive in years." I frowned. Alive? Ethan, he's divorced, lonely, and drinking himself to sleep most nights. That's not alive. That's desperation. But Ethan only shrugged. Or maybe he's figuring out who he really is. The words slashed through me. I pressed the coffee mug too hard against the counter, the ceramic threatening to crack. "You know what I'm figuring out?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "That stable isn't a prison. It's what people spend their whole lives trying to find." He chuckled bitterly. "Stable is just another word for boring." The sentence hung between us like poison. That night, lying in bed, I whispered, "Do you regret us?" He turned his face away. "I don't know." Something inside me cracked. In the weeks that followed, Ethan became a stranger. He bought expensive sneakers he didn't need, switched to tighter shirts that showed off muscles I'd barely noticed before. His phone was always in his hand, screen turned away from me. I tried to reach him, planned date nights, cooked his favorite meals, left notes in his work bag like I used to. But he came home smelling of whiskey and neon lights, and my notes ended up crumpled in the trash. And then one Thursday night in March, the world tilted. I was curled on the bed, reading a novel, when he sat beside me, restless. His knee bounced up and down, fingers twitching like he couldn't sit still. "Clara," he said, voice low, "we need to talk." I lowered my book. "About what?" His eyes flickered, almost guilty, almost defiant. "What if we tried something new?" I forced a smile, trying to play along. "Like salsa dancing? A vacation?" "No," he exhaled, steeling himself. "I mean, opening things up." The air went still. "Opening what up?" My voice was barely a whisper. "Our marriage." I laughed, a sound sharp and brittle. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking, Clara." I stared at him. My Ethan, the man who once whispered baby names into my hair, who promised me forever at the altar, was asking me to share him with strangers. "You can't be serious." He leaned forward, eyes burning. "Think about it. We were so young when we got together. We never tried anything else. How do we know we're not missing out?" My throat tightened, because I already found what I was looking for. You, us. He shook his head. "That's not enough for me anymore." The silence was suffocating. I could hear the clock ticking on the nightstand, each second heavier than the last. Finally, I found my voice. "Ethan, marriage isn't a buffet. You don't sample other options and then come back for your favorite. Marriage is a choice, a commitment. His lips curled into something almost cruel. That's exactly what Ryan says you'd say, controlling, afraid of change. My chest burned. Controlling? Because I want to keep the vows we made? Because I won't let you treat me like a safety net? He stood, pacing. You don't understand. It wouldn't be cheating if we both agreed to it. It could strengthen us. I rose from the bed, trembling. Strengthen us? You think bringing other women into our marriage will make me love you more? He stopped, finally meeting my eyes. It might make me stay. The words punched the air from my lungs. Stay. As if our love had become a bargain. As if I had to share him to keep him. I shook my head, tears streaming hot down my face. If you need someone else to convince you to stay, then you're already gone. He didn't answer. He just turned, walked out of the room, and left me in the crushing silence of our bedroom. That night, I curled into the corner of the bed, hugging his pillow like a lifeline. But it smelled different now. Not of home, but of a man drifting farther and farther away. And for the first time since we said I do, I wondered if our vows had already been broken. The morning light filtered through our blinds like prison bars across the bed. Ethan wasn't beside me. Again. I found him in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone with that vacant smirk he always wore after a late night. He didn't even look up when he said, I'm going to Vegas next weekend, with the guys. I dropped the mug in my hand. It clattered against the counter, a crack zigzagging through the porcelain. Vegas? My voice rose. Ethan, we're saving for a house. Every dollar counts. He waved me off. Relax, it's one trip. One trip we can't afford. And for what? To drink and gamble with Ryan until you forget you're married? His jaw tightened. I'm not asking for permission. The words were acid. I felt my pulse hammering in my throat. So this is how you handle our marriage problems? By running away to Vegas? He smirked, bitter. Maybe I need to know what I'm missing. Maybe then I'll know if this is enough. The kitchen blurred around me. Missing? I whispered. Ethan looked up finally, eyes cold. All my friends think you're controlling, that you won't let me share myself. Maybe they're right. Share. The word slashed through me like a knife. Share him. The man I gave my vows to, like he was a commodity, something to be passed around. I stepped closer, my hands trembling. Share you? I repeated. Ethan, you are my husband. We don't share each other. He shrugged, almost mocking. That's such an outdated way of thinking. Something in me broke. I walked past him, into our bedroom, and pulled his suitcase from the closet. My hands shook as I threw shirts and jeans inside, every folded corner a piece of my anger, every zipper a scream I couldn't let out. Behind me, his voice hardened. What are you doing? I didn't look at him. Helping you explore. Clara, stop. This is... I spun around, eyes blazing through tears. You said I was controlling. Fine, then go. Be free. Live your life, but not as my husband. For the first time, he looked unsettled. I was just talking. I didn't mean... You meant every word. My voice cracked. I heard you. His face softened for a flicker, like the old Ethan was trying to crawl back. But then his pride swallowed him whole. I don't want a divorce, he muttered. You want to date other women, I said, pointing to the suitcase. I want a partner who chooses me. We're not the same anymore. He stared at me, his chest rising and falling. Then he grabbed his keys, muttered, I'll stay at Ryan's, and stormed out. The door slammed, rattling the walls. And then, silence. A silence so complete it felt alive. It pressed against my skin, seeped into my lungs, settled heavy in the pit of my stomach. That night, the bed was half empty. The pillow beside me was cold. For years, I had fallen asleep to the sound of Ethan's breathing, the steady rhythm that anchored me. Now I stared at the ceiling, counting seconds, each one a reminder that forever had an expiration date. I tried to pray, tried to cry, tried to pretend this was just a nightmare, but somewhere deep down, I knew. My marriage wasn't bending anymore. It had snapped. I loved him. God, I still loved him. But love couldn't hold together someone determined to walk away. And Ethan had already chosen the door. The house was too quiet. At first, I thought I would miss the chaos of Ethan's late nights. The smell of whiskey clinging to his jacket, the endless arguments that ended with me curled up in tears. But when the silence finally came, it wasn't peace. It was grief, dressed in stillness. 3 days passed without a word from him. On the 4th, I called a divorce attorney. She's abandoned the marital home, I explained, voice shaking. Then I caught myself. He's abandoned it. The attorney, a calm man named David Morrison, didn't flinch. That works in your favor. If you're ready to file, I'll have the papers drawn up this week. I hung up the phone, numb. By Monday, the papers were signed. That's when the messages started. First, we need to talk. Then, I miss you. Then, late at night, the one that made my throat tighten, I made a mistake. I blocked his number. He tried again from different phones. I blocked those too. But Ethan was relentless. He showed up outside my office one afternoon, pacing by the entrance like a ghost I couldn't get rid of. When my assistant buzzed me, I said, "Tell security I don't have a husband." Still, he didn't stop. 2 weeks later, I ran into him at the grocery store. My cart was half full. Milk, bread, a bottle of red wine for the lonely evenings, when I felt a presence at my side. "Clara," he said. My stomach dropped. I turned, and there he was. Ethan looked different, hollowed. His skin was pale, his eyes ringed with sleepless shadows. The tailored shirt he wore hung loose, like he'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. "I was confused," he said, voice shaking. "My friends, they gave me bad advice." I gripped the cart so hard my knuckles whitened. "The same friends who told you I was controlling? The same friends who convinced you freedom meant destroying your marriage?" He winced. "They don't understand what we had." "They understood perfectly." My voice was low, sharp. "They wanted you single, like them, and you let them." He stepped closer. "I see that now. Clara, please, can we try again?" For a moment, I almost faltered. This was the man I'd loved for years, the man who once planned a future with me. But looking at him now, all I saw was the wreckage he chose over me. "Try what?" I asked coldly. "You wanted to explore. How's that going?" His eyes glistened. "It's horrible. The women, they don't care. They just want one night. They disappear after." I stared at him, tears burning my eyes, but not from sympathy, from rage. "That's the thing about advice from broken people, Ethan. Consider the source." He swallowed. "Ryan's dating someone from a bar. Derek went back to his ex. Josh doesn't even answer my calls anymore. They moved on, and I'm the one left behind." My chest tightened, but I forced the words out. "That's exactly what you chose. You left me for them, and now you're alone." He reached for me, desperation flickering in his eyes. "I don't want to be alone. I don't want to be single. I want you." I stepped back. "You don't want me. You want comfort. You want the stability you threw away. But Ethan, I can't be your consolation prize." His hand dropped. His shoulders sagged. For the first time, I saw him break. "I was wrong," he whispered. "So wrong. What can I do to fix this?" My heart splintered, because I knew the answer, and it was one he couldn't accept. "You can't fix this," I said softly. "You asked me to share you. You can't ask that and still call it love." The silence that followed was deafening. Shoppers passed by, carts squeaking, unaware that the ruins of a marriage lay between the frozen food aisle and the cereal boxes. Ethan's face crumpled, but I didn't stay to watch. I pushed my cart forward, leaving him standing in the wreckage of his own choices. Back home, I poured that bottle of red wine into a glass and sat by the window, watching the night press against the glass. My chest ached, but beneath the grief, something steady flickered. Dignity. For the first time since Ethan said the word share, I felt like myself again. The divorce wasn't just a legal document. It was my line in the sand. My promise to myself. I would never beg for loyalty. I would never barter my self-worth for someone else's freedom. Ethan had made his choice, and I was making mine. 3 years have passed since I wheeled that grocery cart away from Ethan. The divorce became official 6 months after that night. He contested it at first, begging the court for time, dragging his feet like he could somehow stall the inevitable. But abandonment of the marital home made it straightforward. The house was awarded to me. He walked away with his suitcase and his freedom. The freedom he thought was worth more than us. I didn't hear from him for months after the court date. Then came the occasional texts, birthday messages, holiday greetings, late-night apologies. I never replied. I couldn't. Because somewhere along the way, I started to heal. It wasn't easy. The first year, I cried more nights than I slept. I missed the smell of his coffee in the morning, the way he hummed when he concentrated, the warmth of his hand brushing mine across the couch. But every time the grief threatened to swallow me, I reminded myself of his words. Maybe I need to know what I'm missing. That sentence became my armor. It reminded me that the man I loved had already left, long before I packed his suitcase. Time has a way of softening jagged edges. 1 year turned into 2. Slowly, I found pieces of myself again. I went back to grad school, finished my master's degree in literature. I started hiking on weekends, joined a book club, painted the kitchen walls a cheerful yellow. Small rebellions that turned my house back into my home. And then, when I least expected it, I met Daniel. He wasn't flashy. He didn't sweep me off my feet in a whirlwind of roses or promises. He was steady, kind, patient. A history teacher at the public high school. He asked questions and actually listened to my answers. He remembered the little things, how I liked my tea, the author I quoted too often, the way my hands shook when I spoke about Ethan. On our third date, I blurted, "Why would you want someone like me? I'm divorced. I'm broken." Daniel took my hand, steady as ever, and said, "You're not broken, Clara. You just outgrew someone who didn't deserve you." That was the night I realized love didn't have to be chaos. It could be calm, and calm could be extraordinary. Last spring, Daniel and I stood before our families and said vows of our own. Simple, quiet, heartfelt. No talk of sharing or missing out. Just two people choosing each other, fully, without conditions. When he slipped the ring on my finger, he whispered, "You're mine, and I'm yours. That's all I'll ever need." For the first time in years, I believed in forever again. Every so often, I still hear about Ethan. Small-town gossip travels faster than the wind. Ryan's freedom didn't last. His second marriage collapsed in under a year. Derek bounced back to his ex and broke up again weeks later. Josh disappeared to another city, chasing a nightlife that didn't want him anymore. And Ethan? He never remarried. They say he dates, but nothing sticks. He's restless, drifting from woman to woman, always looking, never finding. Apparently, he complains that no one wants to commit anymore, that women are cold, untrusting, unwilling to settle. I don't feel sorry for him. He wanted to explore. He got exactly what he asked for. He just discovered the dating market was colder than the bed he abandoned. Sometimes, when I'm lying beside Daniel at night, I wonder if Ethan ever remembers that Thursday in March, the night he sat on our bed and asked me to open our marriage. I wonder if he remembers the look on my face, the crack in my voice when I asked, "Do you regret us?" I hope he does. I hope he remembers that moment, because that was the night everything ended. Not when I filed for divorce, not when the papers were signed, but the moment he asked me to share him. Those words cost him everything. Now, as I sit on my porch with Daniel's arm around my shoulders, watching the sun dip low across the quiet street, I feel something I once thought I'd lost forever. Peace. Ethan thought boring was a curse. He thought stability meant he was missing out. But here's the truth. Boring is underrated. Boring is the man who comes home every night, who asks about my day, who remembers to buy milk without being asked. Boring is the warmth of a life built brick by brick, steady and unshaken by passing storms. Ethan chased chaos. I chose calm. And calm turned out to be extraordinary. Hey everyone, before we dive in, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button if you enjoy stories like this. Your support means everything. I'm Christine Restivo, 28 years old, and this is the story of how I almost married the wrong man and how he walked out 3 weeks before our wedding to explore his feelings for someone else. Back then, I really thought I had my life mapped out. I'd been with Ethan for 5 years. We met in college, in a psychology elective. I was the quiet one who always sat near the front, scribbling notes like my life depended on it. Ethan, though, he was the magnetic type. The guy who could crack a joke in class and have everyone, even the professor, laughing. We couldn't have been more different, but somehow that difference pulled us together. He used to tell me, "Izzy, you're my anchor. You make me feel steady." And I believed him. Believed us. Life tested us early on. When Ethan's dad fell sick 2 years into our relationship, I took time off work to help him manage hospital visits. When money got tight, I handled the bills until he got back on his feet. I even turned down a promising job out of state because he wanted to stay close to his family, to build something together here. I didn't think twice about it, because when you love someone, sacrifice doesn't feel like loss. It feels like commitment. Fast forward. Last year, Ethan proposed during a weekend hike at sunrise. No flashy spectacle, just us. A quiet trail, his hand shaking as he held out the ring. I cried, of course, said yes instantly. We started planning the wedding. An outdoor ceremony at a beautiful venue, 100 guests, everything mostly paid out of my savings since Ethan's career in sales was still stabilizing. I put down deposits, chased vendors, even helped him choose my dress, laughing as he swore he wouldn't peek. For a while it felt perfect, but looking back, the cracks had already started to show. 6 months before the wedding, Ethan grew distant. He stayed late at work more often. When he talked about his coworkers, one name slipped in over and over: Chloe. She was on his sales team, charismatic, spontaneous, always doing crazy things like bungee jumping or last-minute road trips. At first, I brushed it off. Ethan had female friends before, and I wasn't insecure. Trust, after all, was the bedrock of our relationship. But then, his social media told a different story. Pictures from team nights out, where Chloe was always by his side. His laugh too wide, her arm slung a little too close. He'd come home buzzing with stories. Chloe convinced the team to try karaoke at midnight. Or, Chloe says I should loosen up, try surfing sometime. And then, the comparison. Izzy, we should do something adventurous like Chloe does. It stung, but I told myself it was wedding stress. We were both stretched thin. Then came that night, 3 weeks before the wedding. I remember it in painful detail. I'd cooked his favorite, creamy pasta with garlic bread, candles lit, soft music in the background. I thought it would be a calm, intimate evening. Instead, Ethan sat there picking at his food, scrolling on his phone like the dinner was just an inconvenience. I asked gently, "Is everything okay?" He set his fork down, his expression unreadable. Then, in a voice too steady, like he'd rehearsed it, he said, "Izzy, we need to talk. I think we should postpone the wedding." I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. "Postpone? What are you talking about?" He exhaled, leaning back, arms crossed, eyes cold. "I've been feeling drawn to someone else. Chloe. Nothing physical yet, but the feelings are strong. I need space to explore them. It wouldn't be fair to you, or me, to rush into marriage without knowing for sure." The words hit like a physical blow. 5 years of loyalty, sacrifice, building a future together, reduced to a casual confession, spoken as if he were rescheduling a dentist appointment. I whispered, "So, you're saying I'm not enough?" He tilted his head, almost pitying. "Not boring, Izzy. Just safe. Predictable. Chloe makes me feel alive in ways you don't. With you, everything's comfortable, and I can't risk wondering what if after marriage." I felt the room tilt around me. Memories rushed back. Me covering his rent when he lost his job. Me holding him when his father passed. Me shelving my own dreams so he could chase his. And now? Now, I was the consolation prize he needed to escape from. I waited for anger to rise, for tears to break. But instead, something inside me went cold. I said quietly, "If that's what you need, Ethan, then go." His eyes flickered with surprise. "That's it? You're not going to fight me?" I stood up, collected the plates, and carried them to the sink. Why would I fight for someone who's already left me? Inside, my heart was shattering, but on the surface, I stayed calm, almost mechanical. That night, Ethan packed a bag and left. No grand goodbye, no apology, just silence and the faint sound of the door clicking shut behind him. I stayed there, staring at the engagement ring, glinting under the kitchen light. Everything I'd planned, every dream we'd built, it all collapsed in a single evening. And I had no idea just how much lower things would go. The next morning, I woke to silence. His side of the bed was cold, untouched, and for a moment I thought maybe it was all a nightmare. But then I saw the closet, half empty, hangers swinging like little reminders. Reality hit hard. I spent that day canceling everything. Venue, florist, caterer, all called in one relentless sequence. Some deposits were gone for good, and each non-refundable stung like another cut. When I emailed our guests, I kept it short. The wedding is off. Ethan and I have parted ways. No explanations. Just the truth in the plainest form. Of course, silence didn't stop the fallout. Ethan's mother rang me within hours. Her voice cracked with anger. "Izzy, after 5 years, this is how you quit? You don't even try?" His sister followed with a text. "Cold. That's what you've always been. No wonder he needed more." I stared at the words, numb. Not one of them asked about my side of the story. Not one paused to think that maybe I wasn't the villain here. I moved into a tiny apartment across town that weekend. 1 bedroom, creaky floors. The kind of place that smelled faintly of old wood and loneliness. I left my key to our shared home on the counter without a note. No confrontation, no fight. Just gone. Nights became the hardest part. I'd lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how you can go from my anchor to not enough in such a short time. I replayed his words endlessly. Safe, predictable, boring. They burrowed under my skin until I started believing them. Was I really that dull? Was my love just stability dressed as mediocrity? I started therapy. At first, all I did was sit in silence while the counselor asked gentle questions, but even silence had weight. I realized I'd built so much of my identity around Ethan's needs that without him, I felt hollow, like I'd lost myself alongside him. To cope, I threw myself into work. I was a project manager at a tech firm. Long hours, endless meetings. The distraction was brutal, but necessary. My coworkers probably thought I was ambitious. In truth, I was just trying not to drown. But whispers found their way to me. Mutual friends mentioned Ethan and Chloe, inseparable now. Weekend getaways, selfies on cliffs, spontaneous road trips. Their feeds filled with captions like, "Living life fearlessly," and "Found my soulmate." Each post felt like salt on an open wound. I scrolled past quickly, pretending I didn't care. But at night, I'd remember the way he once looked at me, the words he used to whisper, "You're my home." And I'd wonder, was I ever truly? Then came the cruel twist. At brunch one Sunday, a friend leaned across the table, hesitating before saying, "Izzy, I heard Ethan and Chloe got married. Quick courthouse thing. 6 months after you two split." The words sank like stones in my chest. Married. Already. I managed a weak smile, stabbing my fork into my eggs like it didn't matter. But inside, I broke all over again. Not only had he left me 3 weeks before our wedding, but he'd sprinted into another, as if what we had meant nothing. Back in my apartment that night, I sat on the floor with a glass of wine and stared at the engagement ring still sitting in its velvet box. I hadn't been able to sell it or even tuck it away properly. It just lived there on the coffee table, mocking me. I whispered to the empty room. Was I just a placeholder? Did I waste 5 years being his practice run? My phone buzzed then, a notification from social media. Chloe had posted again. This time the caption read, "Here's to new beginnings with my forever." The photo showed Ethan, grinning wide, arm wrapped around her waist like she was his prize. I slammed the phone face down, my heart thudding in my ears. For the first time, anger rose above the grief. If he thought he'd traded up, if he thought I'd stay silent forever, he was wrong. I didn't know it yet, but the cracks in their perfect little world were already forming. And when they shattered, I'd be watching. Time passed, but not easily. Each morning, I dragged myself into the office with coffee strong enough to mask the exhaustion. At night, I journaled, because therapy had taught me to put feelings somewhere safe. "Today I survived," I'd scribble. Some days that was the only victory worth noting. But the universe has a strange sense of timing. It started with whispers. A colleague from Ethan's company bumped into me at the grocery store. After some awkward small talk, she leaned in, her voice dropping. "I shouldn't say this, but Ethan and Chloe? They're not exactly the fairy tale couple people think." I forced a polite smile, but inside, curiosity pricked sharp. Later, another mutual friend filled in the details. Ethan pressured Chloe to quit her job and help with his big startup idea. He drained her savings chasing one scheme after another. Rumors of him flirting at bars, even with Chloe's friends, spread like wildfire. My hands trembled as I set my glass down. The irony too bitter to ignore. He had once mocked me for being predictable, safe. Now his so-called adventure was just recklessness dressed up as freedom. The cracks widened quickly. I heard about public arguments, screaming matches at restaurants, him storming out mid-dinner. One friend confessed she'd seen Chloe crying in a parking lot, mascara streaking her face, Ethan's voice booming through the open car door. By the time their 1-year anniversary rolled around, they weren't celebrating. They were divorcing. He'd cheated, openly, carelessly, and when Chloe confronted him, he didn't fight. He just left. When I learned the news, I sat quietly in my little apartment, tea growing cold beside me. My mind replayed that night at our dinner table, his voice steady as he told me Chloe made him feel alive. Alive. I whispered the word to myself, then laughed bitterly. Alive until he drained her dry. There was no joy in knowing I'd been right, no victory in watching him fall. It was vindication laced with sadness, because I had loved him once, and some stubborn, foolish part of me mourned the boy I met in college, the one who promised me forever. Meanwhile, I had changed. Work became more than a distraction. I applied for the promotion I once passed on to support Ethan. When I got it, I stood in my boss's office, stunned as she said, "You've earned this, Izzy. Don't let anyone make you smaller again." I started hiking again, too. Alone at first, then with small groups. The trails gave me back pieces of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. The quiet strength, the steady rhythm of my own breath, the reminder that I could stand on my own 2 feet without anyone's anchor. I was healing, slowly. And then, just as the scars were beginning to fade, he tried to tear them open again. One evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, until curiosity got the better of me. "Izzy, it's Ethan. I got a new number. Can we talk? I miss you." I stared at the screen, frozen. The man who called me boring, who traded me in for chaos, who married someone else within months, he missed me? I didn't reply, but the text didn't stop. A few days later, another came, this time from his old work email. "I know I hurt you. Things with Chloe didn't work out. She wasn't who I thought she was. Abusive, manipulative. I left her. Got divorced last month. It's been hell. Remember how good we were? I made a huge mistake. Please, let's meet for coffee, just to talk." I dropped my phone onto the couch, bile rising in my throat. A mistake? That's what he called dismantling my life? I typed back 2 words, "not interested." And I blocked him. I thought that would be the end of it. But Ethan wasn't done. He found other ways to reach me. Through old friends, through his family. His best friend left me a voicemail. "He's really sorry, Izzy. He's broken. At least hear him out." Then his sister, the same one who once called me cold, sent a text dripping with venom. "Grow up, Izzy. You owe him a conversation after all those years he carried you emotionally. Don't be selfish." Carried me? I nearly laughed. The revisionist history would have been comical if it weren't so infuriating. I blocked her too. But the hardest part was his mother. One night she called me, her voice weary but sharp. "Family is family. Ethan made a mistake, yes, but he's learned. Don't throw away years of love over pride. Fix this before it's too late." I didn't argue. I just hung up mid-sentence. And yet, the calls, the texts, the pleas, they kept coming. A relentless storm pressing against the walls of my carefully rebuilt peace. I thought I was strong enough to ignore them all. Until one afternoon, I stepped out of my office building and saw him waiting by the entrance. His hair was unkempt, his eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't slept. He looked smaller somehow, shoulders hunched, clothes wrinkled. "Christine," he called softly, desperation lacing every syllable. "Please, don't walk away. I need to talk to you." And against my will, my heart skipped a beat. Not out of love, but out of dread. Because this wasn't over. The city street blurred behind him, cars honking, people weaving past, but all I could see was Ethan. The man who once called me his forever, who then threw me away like I was the safest option on a boring menu, now stood slouched in front of my office building. His eyes carried the wild, desperate shine of someone who'd lost everything. "Please, Izzy," he said, voice cracking. "Just give me 5 minutes." I didn't move closer. I kept the distance between us like a wall. This isn't the place or the time. But he stepped forward anyway, hands raised in surrender, like approaching a frightened animal. His words came in a rush. I was wrong. Chloe, she wasn't what I thought. She yelled at me constantly, pushed me, tore me down. She cheated on me, Izzy. She drained me. And when I tried to fix it, she walked out. I lost everything. My savings, my job contacts, even my apartment. I'm staying at a friend's couch now, but you were always there. You were steady. You were the only real thing I ever had. He reached out as if to take my hand. I stepped back. "Ethan, don't you dare rewrite history. You left me. You mocked my stability. And now that you're broke and broken, suddenly it's a virtue?" He flinched like I'd slapped him. For a moment he tried softening, his voice dropping to a pleading whisper. "We can start over. Postpone was stupid. I see that now. We can still have the wedding, the life we planned. You'll see. I'll be better this time." I stared at him, the audacity choking me. Did he really believe he could crawl back, brush off the wreckage, and slot me back into his narrative like nothing happened? I shook my head slowly. That life doesn't exist anymore. You burned it. You buried it. And I'm not digging it up. Something shifted then. His desperation curdled into anger. His jaw tightened, his words sharpened like knives. "So that's it? After everything I gave you, you're just done? Cold, selfish Christine, acting like a saint. You think you're too good for me now? You'll regret this. One day you'll realize no one else will put up with your boring, safe little world." People passing by turned their heads at the venom in his voice. My chest tightened, but I didn't let him see me flinch. Instead, I said calmly, If boring means I don't have to babysit a man who destroys everything he touches, then yes, I'll take boring. I walked past him, heels clicking against the pavement, refusing to look back. But Ethan wasn't finished. Days later, an email landed in my inbox from a strange account. The subject line, "One last chance." Against my better judgment, I opened it. His words spilled across the screen. "Izzy, I'm sorry. I lost control. I'm scared. Everything's falling apart. My friends have turned their backs. My family thinks I'm worthless and I can't get a job. Please, for what we had, give me one conversation. Attached is something I kept. The ring. Our ring. I couldn't throw it away. I held on to it because deep down, I knew we weren't finished." There it was, a photo of my old engagement ring. The same ring I'd once stared at under the kitchen light, numb and broken. Now it was his proof of devotion. Pathetic. I closed the laptop and deleted the email. Still, he found new ways to press himself into my life. His best friend left another voicemail. "You're being cruel, Izzy. He's trying." His sister doubled down with another text. "Selfish. You always were." Even his father called me once, his tone rough. "He's family. Family deserves second chances." I blocked every number, every email, every attempt. But it wore me down, like water carving into stone. I'd built walls around myself, yet Ethan kept pounding on them, desperate to be let back in. One night I dreamed of him, the old Ethan, the boy who once carried my textbooks across campus, who kissed me under the rain, who whispered that I was his home. For a moment, waking up, I almost ached for that version of him. But then I remembered that boy was gone. The man outside my office, the man spitting venom when denied, the man clinging to an engagement ring like it was a lifeline, that was the real Ethan. And no matter how loud he begged or how pitiful he looked, I wasn't going back. Because this time I wasn't the one desperate. But I also knew this. He wouldn't stop until he saw it for himself. The day he realized I was truly gone, truly happy, truly beyond his reach, that would be the day he broke completely. And fate was already setting the stage for it. Time has a way of softening edges. By the next year, my life looked nothing like the hollow apartment days. I'd leaned into my promotion, my projects gaining recognition. My boss even trusted me with mentoring new hires, a quiet validation that I was worth more than Ethan ever let me believe. But the real change, I found joy again. It started with hiking groups. At first, I joined just to avoid being alone on the trails. But that's where I met Daniel. He was different, calm but adventurous, thoughtful without being overbearing. He didn't want me to shrink so he could shine. He wanted us to grow side by side. Conversations with him felt effortless. Laughter returned, not the nervous kind, but the kind that settles deep in your chest and reminds you you're alive. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as someone's anchor, not as someone's safe option, but as myself. Life moved forward with quiet happiness. Weekend trips, dinners filled with warmth, not tension. Nights where silence wasn't heavy, but comfortable. And with each day, Ethan became a fading shadow. Until the wedding. A mutual friend, Tom, was getting married. Ironically, at the same venue Ethan and I had once booked. When the invitation came, I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to face the ghosts, but another part knew I was ready. Daniel came as my +1, and walking into that garden with his hand in mine, I realized something. I wasn't haunted anymore. I was free. Then I saw him, across the lawn, hunched in a suit that hung a little loose on his frame, hair thinner, smile forced. Ethan, alone. Our eyes met. His widened instantly, and I knew he'd been waiting for this. Sure enough, as soon as the ceremony ended, he made his way toward me, cutting through the crowd like a moth to flame. "Christine," he whispered, pulling me aside near the bar, eyes glistening. "Seeing you here, it kills me. We could have had this. We should have had this. Chloe's gone for good. She divorced me, left me with nothing. No job, no home, no friends. I lost everything. And now I realize you were my everything. Please, Izzy, take me back. I'll change. I swear." For a moment, the noise of the reception dulled. It was just him and me, years of pain condensed into his shaking voice. But there was no apology. Not for humiliating me, not for abandoning me, not for weaponizing his family and friends against me. Every word was about his loss, his need, his desperation. I glanced across the room. Daniel stood chatting with Tom's groomsmen, his laugh easy, his posture relaxed. A man who wanted me, not for comfort, not as a fallback, but as a choice. I turned back to Ethan. "No, I said softly, firmly. That chapter is closed. His face paled. You can't mean that. I do. I've moved on. I have someone now who sees me for who I am, not for what I can give him. You wanted growth, Ethan. I found mine without you. So, I gestured toward Daniel. Meet him later if you want. But us, we're finished. Forever. Ethan's eyes filled with something between rage and despair. How can you be so indifferent? After 5 years? Easy, I cut in. My voice didn't shake. You taught me to prioritize myself. That was your only gift. I stepped away, leaving him there, mouth open, hands trembling, as I slipped back to Daniel's side. He smiled as I approached, lacing his fingers through mine. Together we melted back into the celebration. Music, laughter, joy. And Ethan? He stood alone, his failure on full display. Guests whispered, eyes darting. He didn't follow me. He couldn't. Later, as Daniel and I danced under the string lights, I caught a glimpse of Ethan slipping out the back, shoulders hunched, swallowed by the dark. That was the last time I ever saw him. Looking back now, I realize revenge wasn't blocking his calls or watching him unravel. Revenge was living well. Peace wasn't silence born of grief. It was silence born of choice. So, to anyone listening who's been betrayed the way I was, trust the process. Walk away with dignity. Let karma handle the rest. Because sometimes the best closure is no closure at all.